So NiP did it. They won IEM Oakland 2017, their second time in a row winning IEM Oakland, and actually their first really big international title since the last IEM Oakland in 2016, as of course the only other first place finish they've had since then was at DreamHack Open Valencia, which was obviously a tournament that didn't really have that much competition. So this was a really big win for NiP, and in the context of some of the recent things that have been going on with NiP, this was definitely a surprising result, and hopefully one that will kickstart NiP into, being able to produce quality results on a regular basis, because if they can, that will certainly make the scene a hell of a lot more interesting alongside some of the other elite teams that we have in the field. Now, when you think about IEM Oakland, it certainly wasn't expected that NiP would do this well when you think about the competition that was going to be in front of them. I mean, obviously you have a team like FaZe, a team that's won a couple of titles. They won E-League Premier, they won ESL One New York. Admittedly, they had a little bit of a tough time at Epicenter, but this is certainly a top team that you expect to be one of the favorites to win the whole thing, right? And then you have a team like G2 that have obviously had their issues at times, but they've also been able to pull out some pretty big results, including a big win at DreamHack Masters Malmo, and they took top 4 at Epicenter, so definitely a quality team. Astralis is always a team that can give you a good run. I mean, they've been placing top 4 at E-League with the second place finish, and then 4th at Epicenter, and this is a team that obviously can do some great things, and so you expect them to maybe have a shot. And then SK, obviously off the back of just winning Epicenter, this is another team that maybe you thought might be a favorite to do well here. Then on top of all that, you really couldn't even count out Cloud9. I mean, they've done well domestically and, won iBuyPower Masters, they won DreamHack Denver, they were top 4 at E-League Premier, including beating NiP in the group stages, and you had to count them to have a favorable chance, given their track record against, NiP head-to-head especially. And lo and behold, it's actually NiP who come out on top, and this is really big for them. I mean, they had really had their struggles. I mean, if you go back and look earlier in the year, obviously not getting that deep at Vegas for DreamHack Masters, coming really at the tail end of the rankings at IEM Katowice and the Starlighter I-League Season 3 finals, as well as not really doing anything of note at CS Summit. But then they pick up Rez. They already had Draken on the board a little bit here through some of these tournaments I'm talking about, but then they pick up Rez for ESL One Cologne, don't do that hot there, do okay, and then they go on to DreamHack Open Valencia, they win that, again, admittedly not that much competition, so you can't read too much into it, and then they actually wind up coming and getting a top 4 finish at DreamHack Malmo, and this includes some best of 3 wins over Navi and Gambit. We do know Navi has certainly had their struggles, but Gambit was still actually showing themselves to be a pretty quality team, despite, losing Zeus back over to Navi, which kind of calls into question him a little bit. And then they had a win over FaZe in a best of 1, and they only lost to the eventual champions G2, and one of those maps was an overtime loss in the O2 series, so a pretty good showing there. They did go out in groups at E-League Premier, though, losing to Envy and Cloud9, and then obviously they weren't able to even make it to the European Minor, which has obviously caused a lot of debate about the use of online qualifications in the major system, and this result at IEM Oakland will call that even more into question, as they were able to grab the title again. Great for them to finally get something. It feels like they weren't really in the discussion anymore for elite teams in the international competition of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, but this win hopefully can get them going back in that direction. At least that is the hope. But again, there was a year period basically between this title and the last one at the exact same location, if you don't count the Valencia win against smaller names. And how did they do this? Well, part of this was some big individual performances, particularly Rez and Forest. These two played phenomenal Counter-Strike throughout this tournament. Rez obviously is the one who gets the MVP. I think you could have made an argument for Forest as well. Forest basically played the best event he's played since probably over a year ago at the Starlighter I-League Season 2 finals that NiP were able to take, and that was over a year ago that they were able to do that. So definitely some of the best CS that Forrest has played, as far as, I mean, he's always had some pretty good events, leading up to this moment, but this was definitely big time for him. And then for Rez, this was really probably the best LAN performance of his career, putting up incredible numbers throughout the event. Rez was also just having impact and opening up rounds for his team. Sometimes it was in peripheral roles, like out Squeaky Door on Cash, where he was opening things up for his team, or opening up things on the B platform on Cobblestone. Also played really well on the CT side, particularly think about that Cash win to win the tournament where he was being really aggressive off B on CT and getting flanks and causing a ruckus inside mid garage and making different plays to help them just close out the grand finals. And that's just a few examples of these two guys just playing really great Counter-Strike. Get Right also played solid throughout the event, and all the map wins versus FaZe in the grand finals, as well as all the map wins versus SK in the semifinals. He played great. He obviously had some struggles in the matches they lost against those two teams, and so you kind of wonder, was he the X factor to some degree? And he played okay in groups. So again, a good solid kind of third star, I guess you can say, in the tournament for NiP was in fact Get Right. Draken was really good in the group stages to help them get into playoffs, and he was okay versus SK in the semifinals, but he was pretty quiet in the grand finals, admittedly. But Forrest and Rez were playing so well, and Get Right was also playing fantastic, that it didn't wind up mattering that he was a little bit more quiet. And Exist had a pretty poor event really throughout the event as the IGL for the team. Outside of Cash, the last map of the tournament where he actually came up pretty clutch in some big moments, particularly in the first half, that he had a really good map there. But outside of that, he was pretty quiet throughout the rest of the tournament. So again, really top-heavy performances from guys like Rez and Forrest, but I think Get Right was a great kind of third star that did what he needed to do. And then Draken, again, was really helpful in the group stages in the semifinals against SK. I particularly remember he had a couple of big rounds on, I think it was actually Cobblestone against FaZe in the grand finals as well. On the CT side with the AWP, had a couple of big plays on the B-bomb site to kind of help them get back into that. So he definitely had some impact in the grand finals as well, but admittedly he was still a bit quiet. And then you talk a little bit about the approach of NiP, because I think that's one of the more interesting talking points about this victory for NiP, was their kind of strategic approach to the tournament. Because in the past, when NiP was pulling out some really big results, it was really off the back of these innovative tactics that Threat were coming up with. I mean, one example would be on Cash. You would see them have like this really unique utilization of Molotovs on checkers to help them get some control over towards the B-bomb site. You also had them running kind of like this, what some people were calling it the Ring of Fire tactic on A, where they were, really heavy molly utilization on the A-bomb site and some unique, use of flashbangs and smokes as well to do some cool executes. Cobblestone, obviously famous for the 3 smokes from mid onto B. Also a smoke from mid that lands into connector, and being able to use those smokes to really keep your opponent guessing on whether or not you're going to do a straight up execute or whether or not you're going to be doing some type of fake later on in the round. And so it really seemed to be off the back of really cool stuff like that was really helping them get T-side rounds and catching people off guard and just kind of helping just innovate the game really. And so you would kind of see a lot of that, a lot of like really execute heavy type stuff. But their T-sides in this tournament was very much different. It was really more grounded in playing kind of slower defaults, playing off map control, trading well early to get themselves into 3v3 type situations, and just playing mid rounds very well, making very decisive mid round calls, and kind of, handling chaos very well with picks across the map, and then just being able to kind of gather up towards the end, make the right call on the rotation, and be able to close out rounds, and in some cases just kind of grind out some rounds. There was some moments where they were down mid in rounds and had to grind and fight their way back, or some halves where they would start on the back foot from losing pistol and kind of going down 0-3 or 0-5, or just in the middle of the half being down by a few rounds, whether it be like 6-4 or 5-2 or whatever, and kind of just fighting their way back into games. It's being very grindy almost. It's just kind of a way to put it. And I think that was kind of neat, just to see them being able to play off of map control, mid-round reads, and picks very well, and just kind of having really good team play, bouncing off of each other to be able to work themselves into sites as well as post-plant situations. And I think that was just a new look from NiP in that regard. They weren't as reliant on these crazy executes anymore. And it does make you wonder, if they can play this base level of CS so well, if their foundation can be this firm, then can they mix in the executes every now and then when need be to get them through tough spots? And if they can have that, then they'll be the complete package tactically, which would put them up there with some of the other really high tactic teams in the scene. And if they can keep the firepower going, they could be a dangerous team going forward. There's certainly no reason why they couldn't. And some examples of what I'm talking about, by the way, on this approach to the game, you can start with like where they play SK in the semifinals. And Overpass is very much the same story as kind of what they were doing in groups. 8-7 from T side. This is actually after going down 0-5, so they actually started off really slow. And it was Exist getting like a 1v2 clutch to win them one round on the A-bomb site, and then they actually lose the next for the immediate reset and go down to 1-7. So they're off to a really bad start, but they grind their way back with fundamentals. Just start handling the aggression from Fur and company very well, start kind of absorbing that pressure and kind of, dealing with it, being able to get around it or out-trade it, and eventually force them back into the sites to respect them. And then, from that, being able to catch some big flanks. I know Forrest caught a couple of different flanks that tried to come in from behind that fountain, and he was able to get that kill, make sure that wasn't going to be a thorn in their side or a problem that would stop them from winning the round. And so just kind of just handling their opponents really well and just making sure that everyone's on the same page. People were playing discipline and just being able to get the rounds they needed to grind from 1-7 to 8-7 in that first half. Really big. And then having a really big CT side to close out. They had that half at 8-2 actually to win the game overall 16-9. And then on third map on Inferno, where in this particular case, they did have a little bit of a different reason why their T side worked so well. In this particular map they were able to just really control Banana well. Rez and Exist were able to win some early battles at Banana, really push SK back, and then just do standard B hits, smokes, coffins, CT spawn, some Molotovs on the site, couple of flashes, swarm and trade. And that's how they were able to win the bulk of their rounds on T side. And a lot of this from seeing interviews and watching the game was really based on the fact that they were able to really just force SK back into the site. They were never really able to get an early A rotation, and they were just able to sit in B and set up all their grenades with no real pressure coming onto them. And so this can, be attributed as a fault to SK for not being able to adjust to the B pressure well, but also just, props to NiP for being able to exercise control of Banana so efficiently and being able to just set themselves up to play off of each other and execute on the B bomb site. And then they wound up winning this and obviously going to the grand finals against FaZe. And against FaZe, they didn't have the same luck on Inferno, obviously. They wound up losing that map, of course. But we did see them, obviously, wind up winning the whole series anyhow. Despite the fact they got crushed on Inferno and Overpass, they were able to get the other maps. First off, they were able to kick off the series with the win on Cobblestone. Obviously a weaker map for FaZe, if we're honest, so you have to factor that one in. But again, this time they actually did well from the CT side. They got 9 rounds. They did get the 3-0 start from winning Pistol, but then they actually lost the next 6 rounds in a row. So they went down 6-3, but then they grind out 6 rounds. Draken had a really big round with AWP one round. Get Right had a really big round from the mid slope. Rez was getting into the game on the B-bomb side as well, so they grinded their way back. Again, kind of showing some resilience, which is also a big factor in how NiP was able to get something going. And on their T side, again, it was just winning rounds off of mostly B trade plays, which is kind of the meta of Cobble T side, to be fair. It's just being able to control B platform as terrorists and use that to kind of spill into the site and trade with maybe like a smoke wall in the center of the site. So mostly basic stuff is used on Cobble T side, and NiP was able to use that well. Again, no complex executes like we saw in Cobblestone in the past from NiP. Where they were innovating on the map, just really being able to ground themselves in the fundamentals here and get it. Then they lose the Inferno, which we already talked about, and then Train, they were able to win this as well. Again, getting that 8 rounds on T side. A bit of a grind, actually, as it was 4-2 in FaZe's favor at one point, and then it was tied 5-all. But then they were able to, really get out in front and kind of win out the late rounds. One round was actually just off of a big individual effort from Rez, to be honest. He got a pick and enter, second kill and enter, winds up getting a hat trick on the inner bomb site and just basically wins around for his team. So getting some of those individual efforts certainly helped out here as well. And then they were able to reset FaZe's economy in the mix of all that to top it off. And then they just had a really solid CT side again. They managed FaZe's explosive play very well. They were able to out-trade FaZe in some really key moments in certain rounds and just were able to limit FaZe's impact with their firepower. So, well done to be able to do that against FaZe, though maybe this is starting to show that FaZe's map pool isn't as deep as maybe some people thought. They wound up getting crushed on Overpass and map 4, and this brings us to map 5 on Cache, where again they have another big T side. At one point they were down 6-4, but then they won the last 5 rounds in a row in that half. And again, a lot of it's mid-control play into standard late A hits. Again, a lot of it is handling 3v3 2v3 type situations well after early trades, just handling the chaos with ease and just making really decisive mid-round reads and kind of flowing well together as a unit. Then they close out on CT side, and this is actually really based on some aggression thrown in by Rez on the B-bomb site, and Get Right at middle had a couple of aggressive plays. They're able to disrupt FaZe a lot, actually. But again, the basis of NiP's success was really just being able to play really good T-sides throughout this tournament. It's their CT side that usually let them down in their map losses. Maybe the only exception to that would be the fact that they couldn't get a whole lot done on their overpass against FaZe in the grand finals. But outside of that, their T-sides were pretty awesome. Even in situations where they had slow starts, they grinded their way back. So can NiP continue this is really going to be the question now that people will ask. You have to look at their map pool a bit to kind of see if that's going to carry them through. Obviously, their cash looks really strong right now after beating FaZe in the grand finals on it. They did lose their last 3, though, going into this tournament. They had a 7-0 start at the early part of this lineup's career, beating C9 a couple times, beating G2 once, beating Mouse Sports once. So I think their cash is actually quite strong. I think with their cobblestone, it's too early to tell. The sample size is too small, I think. You know, they did beat FaZe in the grand finals here, but they're not known to be a cobble team, and they lost to SK really close in the group stages. They have a win over Envy at E-League Premier, but that's not really one of the stronger offline teams right now, and they lost to C9 pretty big at Cologne. So I think their cobblestone's still up in the air, so not really sure. Same with Inferno. They do have some wins there, but they're against weaker teams like Red Reserve at Valencia and SK at Oakland, which we know has had their struggles on Inferno. And all their losses are actually like huge losses to top teams like FaZe, for instance, in the grand finals here. So I'm not really sure about their their Inferno either. Their Mirage, again, we actually didn't see them play it, I don't think, at IEM Oakland. And the last time I did see them play it was a pretty big loss to C9 at E-League Premier. Their wins are against Navi and Red Reserve. So, again, not really super strong wins on Mirage just yet. Their Nuke, by the virtue of the fact that they play Nuke, sets them up pretty well. They don't have, like, super big wins except against FaZe once. And they did lose to Envy once. They traded games with Envy offline in the last few months. So the fact that they play Nuke at all definitely is going to scare a lot of teams who typically would ban Nuke. So just having that as leverage, I think, is fair enough, and they're probably pretty solid on it still. And then their overpass has been really good. I think this is definitely one of the maps that they can count on alongside Cash. And I think their train also seems to be pretty up to snuff so far. Though, again, they haven't played that many maps offline with this vibe just yet to really know. But if I had to guess, I would think that Cash, overpass, and train are probably their big 3. And the fact that they have Nuke available will scare some teams, but I think it's too early to tell what their Cobble, Inferno, and Mirage is really looking like. And they've played, like, outside of Cash, which they've played a lot, they've played all the other maps a very similar amount. So you have to wonder if maybe they're spread really thin because they're basically playing all 7 maps a fair amount of times. They don't really have 2 or 3 maps they've played a hell of a lot except for Cash. So I'm kind of curious how their map pool carries on going forward, you know, if they can kind of really kind of isolate a couple of maps and make sure that they kind of master them and deal with maybe some pitfalls on some of these maps that maybe right now we don't know how good they are because the sample size is small, but they kind of figure it out and see what's best for them going forward. That will certainly be a big factor in how they keep things up. Also, just how these individual performances keep up is going to be another big thing. Rez and Forest, really big tournament here. Can they keep that up going forward? Because they were such key players. Draken, I think, still needs to develop a little bit more. Get Right seems to be pretty stable. If Forrest and Rez can be the stars and Get Right can just kind of be a solid third, then this team will be looking pretty going forward, you would imagine, with the approach that they have and the fact that they can likely bring out more complex executes as needed in the future, with Threat being able to bring some of that in and mix it in to their default play to make them, you know, really diverse across the board with how they can approach the game. But again, I think Draken is going to have to just kind of keep developing, and then the others are just going to have to maintain form. And if that's the case, if those things can happen and they can, you know, build on this approach and they can kind of figure out their map pool, I think this team could, with this 5, finally start being an elite contender again. But again, we have to see a few more tournaments to really see if things will persist. But I'm hoping that it will, because it's great to see NiP kind of, you know, winning a tournament and showing us that they can still contend, and they would make the scene a lot more interesting if they really truly could consistently be one of of those elite teams that we're talking about. But yeah, just wanted to touch on NiP and their title at IEM Oakland 2017. It was certainly a lot of fun to watch, and I hope we get a lot more great CS out of them in the future. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please follow and subscribe for more content.